was one of those nights, the kind where shadows dance longer and moonlight retreats behind clouds. Idris sat alone in his dimly lit room. The clock ticked rhythmically on the wall, yet time felt like it was slipping, or maybe stretching, pulled by something unseen but deeply felt. His desk was cluttered with papers, remnants of his ambitions and dreams, and amid the chaos rested a single candle, its flickering light drawing strange shapes on the walls. Idris had never believed in demons. Not in the literal sense, at least. His were the internal kind, born not of fire and brimstone, but of doubts, fears, and the relentless anxieties that whispered in moments of stillness. Tonight, though, surrounded by the quiet, he felt their presence more keenly than ever. In the far corner of the room, barely visible, was the cracked mirror Idris had neglected to fix. It was where he'd sometimes catch sight of himself, or a version of himself he barely recognized. His own eyes would meet his gaze, reflections searching for something that eluded him, a twisted echo of loss and yearning. This night, however, he swore he saw something else, something dark flickering just at the edge of sight. A trick of the light, surely. Yet, the sensation persisted, thrumming beneath his skin. It was as if tendrils of energy, not his own, were weaving through him, tightening, binding, pulling him into a dance he hadn't agreed to. It was suffocating, the way a nightmare clings and follows, even when you're wide awake. To Idris, life itself was a vessel, a fragile thing that could be overtaken, if not carefully guarded. His vessel often felt heavy, overloaded, as if carrying unwanted passengers. There were moments he wondered if he'd invited them in unwittingly, allowing them to sway his path with their silent yet insidious influence. He remembered a time shortly after college when he'd returned home full of hope, and yet so easily mired in the expectations and unspoken rules of the world around him. He was like a sponge, soaking up everything, too hopeful to discern wisdom from corruption, too eager to please. It was during one of those aimless days that he met them, the voices who waxed poetic about destiny and control, the ones who insisted they knew how to seize life's reins. "Take charge," they said, "or be consumed." But hidden in the folds of their words were tendrils of a more sinister nature. The feeling of being watched from the mirror intensified that night, as if the universe was asking him to see beyond the reflective surface, to look within and beyond the facade of control he clung to. But staring into that mirror was like staring into an abyss, and it stared back without mercy. As the nights wore on, Idris found himself increasingly ensnared in this tangled web. His choices, once his own, seemed to falter under a weight he couldn't quite pinpoint. There were good days, fleeting moments where clarity pierced the fog, but then again the shadows would return, entwining his thoughts, gnawing at his resolve. People around him suggested rather ordinary explanations: stress, anxiety, the pressures of modern life. Yet, Idris couldn't shake the feeling of something otherworldly at play, something that, no matter how mundane his life appeared, spoke to a deeper battle of submission and dominion. He learned that the energy he felt, that gnawing at the edges of his consciousness, was as ancient as it was elusive. It was the embodiment of contracts never spoken but deeply felt, binding and unyielding. These were agreements made not by words alone, but by actions led astray, by paths of least resistance taken time and time again. These weren't just his mistakes. They were the inheritance of all those who had come before him, a generational echo whispering of promises broken, paths abandoned. He wondered, were these demons his own, or had they been passed down, relics of decisions made by ancestors lost to time? The dawn brought questions, and Idris found himself longing for answers. In seeking liberation, he discovered a profound truth. To break free, he needed to first understand the nature of these contracts, their purpose, their origin. He needed to trace his steps back to the creators of these insidious ties. The challenge was daunting. It required him to unravel the tightly knit narratives that had shaped his family's history, to see the leaders, both in blood and in spirit, who had claimed ownership by default of power and fear. These leaders, creators of cycles that restricted freedom with ironclad grip, hadn't just bound him, but those he loved, in chains unseen and unwelcomed. He stood at a crossroads, with one path leading further into the depths of this generational pact and the other offering a faint glimmer of autonomy. It would demand bravery, to confront not only his reflection, but the darkness that danced in the once hidden corners of his life. And so, Idris decided he would no longer be a silent participant in his own imprisonment. He chose defiance, not out of anger or resistance, but out of love for who he truly was and who he yearned to become. The choice ignited a spark, a light of his own making, that cut through the shadows binding him. As days passed into nights and back into dawns, Idris began to notice a shift. The dark reflections in the mirror grew fainter, their hold less tangible. He realized the shadows weren't fighting him anymore. They were reflections, revealing paths not taken, possibilities unexplored. By confronting these stories, these demons and their creators, Idris reinterpreted what had held him captive. No longer was he merely the vessel, he was the master of his fate, free to dance not to another's tune, but his own. With every breath, every act of self-love and understanding, he distanced himself from the creeping tides of inherited darkness. In recognizing this truth, Idris reclaimed his destiny, not as something bound by ancestral shadows, but as a canvas, upon which he could paint with his own colors, forging a legacy not of chains or curses, but of harmony and liberation. As he glanced once more into the mirror, what stared back was no longer a reflection of what was lost, but a radiant glimpse of all that could be. Idris smiled, a gentle, knowing smile, and turned away, stepping into a future defined by light, love, and the stories yet to be told. Meanwhile, the world outside beckoned him with possibilities as vast as the horizon. Idris felt the winds of change rustling through his spirit, encouraging each step forward with a newfound assurance. His journey was far from over, but he could sense the shift. A powerful transformation laid beneath every decision and every dream realized. Idris began exploring his passions with an unparalleled fervor, diving into art, music, and literature. Each pursuit helped illuminate facets of his identity he never knew existed, like unlocking hidden chambers of his soul. He learned to dance through life, not merely following the rhythm, but creating his own unique tempo. His relationships, too, began to reflect this awakening. Friends and family noticed the spark in his eyes, the warmth in his interactions, and the magnetic energy that surrounded him. Conversations grew deeper, connections stronger, and laughter more sincere. Far from the shadows that once dictated his path, Idris found himself surrounded by a supportive community, one that cherished and celebrated his individuality. Idris often sat by the river near his home, the gentle flow of water soothing his senses. It reminded him of his journey, constantly moving, evolving, and purifying. The river became his sanctuary, where he would reflect on his growth, grateful for realizing that true strength lies in the courage to be oneself.